Hello and welcome to American Football Bets. I'm your host Lewis, and coming off a second week in a row with a 100% record for all of our tips given, with our tips for game week 8 and game week 9 all coming in. Today we'll be going over my tips for game week 10 of the NFL regular season. And today we have a nap, 3 next best bets that I'll be explaining in more detail. As always, please gamble responsibly. Link is in the description below. Please do like and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds of your time, 2 clicks of a button, and makes a huge difference to this channel. But without further ado, let's get into it. So, already mentioned it, but just let's have a very quick overview from my tips from last week. We're on a spectacular run now with all of our player props tips for both game week 8 and 9 coming in the last few weeks. Last week, our nap of the week was Daniel Jones at evens to have over 251 passing yards, which he managed easily, ending on almost 100 passing yards more than that line at 342 passing yards. The next best bet we had was CeeDee Lamb to have over 79.5 receiving yards. He finished on 85 receiving yards. And we also had Jackson Smith and Jigba to have over 95.5 receiving yards. He finished on a whopping 129 receiving yards, as we thought. And also Sam Darnold to have over 240.5 passing yards, which also finished with almost 100 more passing yards. He finished on 330 passing yards against the Commanders. So all in all, a great week, and hopefully one we can build upon now looking into game week 10 fixtures. As always, just a really quick reminder or explanation for anyone new to the channel of how I've made my choices for this week's bets. When making these player prop selections, I take into account the current roster and the season's performances so far. We now have a huge set of data from this season's set of games going into game week 10, so we don't really have to look at last season's records too much anymore. And now we have a good feel for where most teams sit with their strengths and weaknesses, and also know the standout players and players to target each week. Each week I then look at each team's strengths and weaknesses, whether that be in the passing game or the running game, and I'll narrow down the fixtures I'm interested in betting on by looking at teams playing each other that have opposing strengths and weaknesses. So for example, are there any teams that are particularly good at gaining rushing yards, playing teams that allow a lot of rushing yards, for example. Now that's all explained, let's look at this week's betting angles in more detail. So I've broken down this week's bets into my nap and a few next best bets, but my nap for week 10 is going to target the matchup between the Bills and the Dolphins, and this is an absolutely perfect matchup for rushing yards for the Bills, and in particular I'm going to be looking at James Cook. We've had success with him, betting on him earlier this season, but also the rushing ability of course, their great quarterback Josh Allen. Although Miami have seen slight improvements over recent weeks, they are still ranked 30th out of all 32 NFL teams for the most average rushing yards allowed per game, allowing on average 145.6 rushing yards per game going into week 10. The Bills, however, remain top of the league for the most rushing yards on average per game, averaging a whopping 161.5 rushing yards per game. The Bills' clear weapon at running back is James Cook, who this season has only rushed for under 100 yards in only 3 games this season. And don't forget, he also ran for a whopping 216 yards just a couple of weeks ago against the Panthers. This is set to be another great week for Cook, and the bookies over-underline for Cook this week seems low to me at just 83.5 yards. He's only been under that line 2 out of 8 games this season, and this week is against the Miami team, who are one of the worst at defending the run, as we've already discussed. And for those reasons, Cook to rush for over 83.5 yards at odds of around evens is my clear nap for this week. But while we're also on this fixture, I also like the line the bookies are offering for Josh Allen to rush for over 26.5 yards. Allen has only rushed less than that in 3 games this season, including 1 game where he's just short by a single yard. So again, the line seems low to me with the Bills against a poor run defense in Miami this week. Now I have a couple of extra bets this week. My next best bets. First, we go to the Chargers game against the Steelers. The Chargers are a top 6 offense so far this season for passing yards on average per game. And in their last 3 games, actually they're 3rd in the NFL for the most passing yards on average, averaging 271.7 yards in the passing game. The Steelers, however, are absolutely bottom of the league at defending the passing game, ranked, of course, 32 out of 32 teams, and allowing on average 278.3 passing yards per game. And that stat is even worse in their recent form, having allowed an absolutely massive 333 0.7 passing yards per game on average in their last 3. And one of those games was against the Packers, where the Steelers let up a huge 143 yards to Packers tight end Tucker Kraft, and that was just to the tight end. For the Chargers, the rookie Oronde Gadsden has been a great pick and proving his worth, having caught every single reception in his last 2 games. In his last 4 games, he's had over 68 receiving yards in each of them, including a mammoth game against the Colts where he had 164 receiving yards, and he's clearly a reliable source and increasingly so for Justin Herbert. And this week against a weak Steelers pass defence, his over-under line is just 52.5 receiving yards. So I like the look of this, and I'll be placing a bet on Gadsden to have more than 52.5 receiving yards against the Steelers at odds around evens. The next fixture I'm targeting this week will be the Bears against the Giants. The Bears run the ball most in the NFL, only second to the Bills, who we mentioned earlier in this video. And in fact, in the last 3 games, the Bears are actually ranked first in the NFL for the most rushing yards on average. The Giants are ranked 31st out of all 32 NFL teams for most rushing yards allowed. So we have a clear case of strength versus weakness in this matchup. The bookies seem to also appreciate that with the over-under market for in rushing yards for the Bears, main running backs DeAndre Swift and rookie Kyle Monangai being quite high, those lines. But I do like the line for rushing yards of the Bears quarterback, Caleb Williams, this week. Williams does have good ability to escape out of the pocket and rush for first downs. He had great success with that last week, rushing 5 times for an average of 10.6 yards per carry. And I think he'll be going into this week against a weak Giants team with a lot of confidence. And we can expect to see more rushing yards from Caleb Williams this week. His over-under line for rushing yards this week is just 16.5 yards. And although he's only been over that mark in half of the games he's played this season, I think given how weak the Giants' defensive front is, particularly against the run, we can expect him, Caleb Williams, to be over this line this week. And so I'll be placing a bet on Williams to have over 16.5 rushing yards against the Giants this week at odds at around evens. So if you like all the tips I've given this week, you can consider placing them into a 4-fold, which should give you odds at around 12 to 1, depending on which bookies you choose to place your bets with this week. But that's it for today's picks. Thanks very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe. It takes just a moment of your time, helps this channel a ton. If you're going to be placing any of the bets I've mentioned, or if you have any other picks for Game Week 10, please do let me know in the comments below. I'll be sure to respond to each and every comment that's left. Please like and subscribe before you go, and see you next time.